This is gonna be my labor and delivery story. And this is Clara, my daughter. She is now 2.5 weeks old, so I want to record this so I don't forget a single thing about our delivery. Although she's not particularly happy right now. Oh, I know. At 38 weeks and 4 days, I decided to head into labor and delivery because the day before and that very morning, I had some bloody spotting. So what I did is I called my doctor, as you're supposed to do. It's like, well, you know what, like I'm having some spotting. Should I come in? Should I get checked out? And they said, well, you know what, it's probably very normal. It might just be your bloody show. You're full term now. It's probably nothing. But if you feel safer, come in and we'll take a look and make sure everything's good. Now, because at 34 weeks, I'd had an ultrasound that... At 34 weeks, I had had an ultrasound done just to check on her, kind of like a growth check and a check on her heart. And at that ultrasound, they'd seen that there was a tiny bit of bleeding behind my placenta. So because of that, I decided, you know what, I'd rather be safe. I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna get checked. So I go in and they put me into triage, and at that time they do a cervical check, which was the first time I'd had a check of my cervix done. Are you okay? Are you okay? I think you are. I think you are. No, not okay. All right, let's try that again while I'm nursing, because this way we have a lot more quiet. So we went into labor and delivery, and by we, I mean my mom and me, because Tim was actually at work, and it was actually his last day of work before going off compassionate leave for his parentals, so that he would be home with me around the time that I would go into labor. So we drive to the hospital, and I get put into triage, where they do a cervical check. This was the first time I'd had a cervical check done. I had read about it being painful. I didn't realize that it is quite painful. Not something to recommend, but not something you can really get around. I guess you can like opt out of them, but I didn't. So they checked, and at that point I was already 3 centimeters dilated and 60% effaced. So it was my bloody show, which the name is horrible, but that's what it was. And she said I was losing my mucus plug, and the doctor expected that we would probably, be seeing each other pretty soon again. But I got sent home. I called Tim, of course. Tim rushed home from work because, at this point it could be like I'm going into labor that night, or I'm going into labor, a week from them is pretty much what my doctor said. So, our hopes were pretty high. We're like, okay, it's happening. It's, it's right around the corner. And then the next couple of days go by and nothing changes. Now in triage, they had the little monitor connected to me. And I can probably insert a picture here. So they were checking pulse and everything, and her heartbeat, as well as contractions. And I was having contractions at that point. Now, it wasn't painful whatsoever. I didn't even realize it had been contractions. I was kind of thinking I was having some Braxton Hicks, but I wasn't really sure. And it was just kind of uncomfortable a little bit. And it was mostly pain in my back. So I wasn't 100%. But now I knew, okay, so these are actually contractions. So yeah, so I was, we were excited, but then the next few days, nothing happened. I was walking every day. I was still out working with the horses. Not much, granted. I was, a bit uncomfortable at this point. But I was, I was being active, but I was also feeling quite exhausted. So by the time Tuesday came around, so at the time I went into labor and delivery, it had been Thursday, now it was Tuesday. I went for a morning walk. We walked 2 kilometers. And after that, I was exhausted all day long. I mean, I was like out of it. I was like half asleep sitting on the couch. I was like, okay, you know what? This is not working for me. I was supposed to meet my mom to like go and brush some of the horses. But I was like, I can't do it. I'm going to go to bed. Like, I'm going to go lie down. I need a nap. So I went and I lay down and I went to nap. Now, I couldn't sleep. And I was having some like light cramping, kind of like very light period cramping. My back was also uncomfortable, but I wasn't really thinking anything of it because it wasn't anything really new or anything stronger than what I had before. It might have been noticeable that I was having it a little more, but not enough for me to actually be like, oh, something is happening. So after my nap, I got up and I went to the bathroom, and my water broke. Now, I was like, I think my water is breaking. Like, I think my water broke. Because it was kind of not like a major gush, but it was kind of like, that's not, you know, I'm not peeing. So I get off the toilet, and I mean, it's quite convenient that it happened there, but I get off and I call Tim. It's like, Tim, like, I'm not joking. I think my water broke. So he comes running, of course. And so I was like, I think my water's breaking. I think my water broke. And we were standing in the hallway, and I had some panty liners in or whatever. I was like, let me double check. So I go back in the bathroom with the door open. There's a relationship new, or a relationship first. And I'm like checking. And sure enough, like I'm leaking fluid. So I'm like, okay, yeah, water breaking. So let's go to the hospital. So now I should mention I was strep B positive. So I knew that when my water broke, I had to go to the hospital immediately. Like, I wasn't like waiting for contractions to be like timeable or stronger or anything. So Tim was pretty excited and kind of nervous at this point. So he like gets everything and runs to the front door, and I'm kind of like, I'm pretty chill at this point, and I'm just grabbed my things and got everything. And he's like waiting. So I get down, like I let my mom know. I'm like, yeah, you know, we'll let you know how things go. And so then we start driving to the hospital, and on the way to the hospital, I called labor and delivery to let them know we're on our way. Now, I guess I must have been a bit more nervous than I realized, because on the phone, I'm pretty sure they were trying to ask me some more questions, but I was like, nope, water broke, I'm strep B positive, we're coming, and I hung up on them pretty much. But it worked out. So we're driving to the hospital, and at this point, I'm noticing my contractions. It's not really painful, I'm noticing them, like it's uncomfortable. So we're driving there, I'm like, should I time them? I should probably start timing them. I'm like, well, is there really a point of timing them? Because now at least it was something I could have timed. Like, it was kind of still a little bit iffy as to like when they started, when they stopped, because it wasn't like, oh, I'm fine, pain stops, I'm not fine. It was kind of like more subtle than that. So it's like, you know what, there's no point. And I mean, we do drive like 40 minutes to the hospital. So we drove there, it's fine. We get there, we get taken into triage. I had a lovely nurse, super nice. And she's like, hey, you know what? You know, sometimes women confuse if their water breaks. Sometimes they just peed themselves. So we gotta check. So she takes out this like Q-tip thing pretty much, and like swaps me down there, and it turns black. So she's like, yeah, that's definitely amniotic fluid, your water broke. And with that, I pretty much automatically then got admitted because of being strep B positive. So the on-call doctor comes into triage. Now this is actually my OBGYN office. I have my one doctor, and then there's two other doctors, and they rotate. So it wasn't my OBGYN that was there at the time, but I didn't mind. The other ones are super lovely as well. So I got really lucky. Like, I liked all three of the doctors very much, so I didn't really care who was there. So it was one of the other doctors, and she goes, you know what? We know you were already 3 centimeters dilated, 60% effaced. We know your water broke. I'm not going to do a cervical check now, because once your membranes rupture, then the chance of infection just gets higher. So there's no point of me checking now. Let's just see how you're progressing. And she kind of mentioned like different options as to like, if I'm not progressing naturally, what they would be doing, like oxytocin or whatever. So she kind of like explained some of those things to me, but she said, you know what, go and get checked into your room, walk around a little bit, and we'll reevaluate in a little while. So that's what we did. We went into the room. I got hooked up to my first round of antibiotics, and I got asked about 1,000,002 questions, which is kind of funny because beforehand I'd already had to fill out like a questionnaires and stuff like a couple of weeks earlier, and I'd handed them into the labor and delivery department. So they had already a bunch of like information for me. But yet again, we were asked questions. So we did that while I got my antibiotics, and then after we were done with that course of antibiotics, Tim and I went to walk the hallways. Now at this point, my contractions were about 2 to 3 minutes apart, and they were getting uncomfortable. Like now they're, you know, slightly painful. And when I say slightly painful, I mean they were actually painful. Like I was holding on to Tim when it was happening. So we walked the hallways a little bit, and it was like really short hallways, so it was kind of awkward. Like there wasn't, like we couldn't like walk the whole hospital. So we were kind of stuck on the labor and delivery ward, just kind of walking back and forth. So we did that for a while. I'm not sure how long, but then after a while it was just kind of uncomfortable. So we went back into our room and the delivery suite. And at this point my contractions were getting really uncomfortable. So the nurse offered me laughing gas. She offered me whether I had a choice between morphine and laughing gas. So I knew laughing gas kind of doesn't affect the baby in the same way that morphine might. So I opted for the laughing gas. So I went for that, and I did that for a while. And at this point, I'm in pain. Like it's no fun anymore. It's uncomfortable. The contractions are still about 2 minutes apart though. So I'd accepted the laughing gas at about 9 p.m., which is about 4 hours after my water broke. And I did that for a while until the resident came in. So they had the on-call doctor and a resident who I'd met in the praxis or in the clinic beforehand as well, very lovely as well. And he did a cervical check at this point to see how far along I was. And at that point I was still only 3 centimeters dilated, so that hadn't changed. And I was now 70% effaced. Now I was kind of disappointed hearing this because I'm also in pain and I'm like, okay, like let's get this party going. But because my contractions had picked up significantly and I was clearly progressing in labor in some ways because of the contractions, they decided against giving me any oxytocins or anything, and to just kind of see what my body did naturally. So he left, and things got unbearable, in my opinion. And I also got, like, I was walking around the room while I didn't have contractions. I was kind of bent over the bed, holding on to Tim or the bed when I was having contractions, breathing in the laughing gas. But it kind of started making me woozy. So I went to lay down on the bed. Every 30 minutes, the nurse was checking baby's heart rate. Everything was good, but I had to lie down for that. So when I lay down for that, I was like, I'm not getting back up. Like, I'm feeling too woozy. And at this point she offered me morphine again, and I accepted because I was in a lot of pain. So I got the morphine and I was out of it. I wasn't really paying attention to anything because I was having really painful contractions, even with the morphine. And Tim noticed though that my vein got apparently really red. So he called a nurse who stayed in the room with us the entire time, said like, oh, like, look at this, is this normal? And she's like, no, are you allergic to morphine? I'm like, no, I'm not, because last summer I'd been quite sick and I'd been on morphine while I was in the intensive care unit in the hospital last summer. So I knew I wasn't allergic. I'm like, nope, I'm not allergic. But she still didn't feel comfortable giving me more morphine. They had some other people come in to check my arm, but they think it was just irritated. Anyway, they weren't gonna give me any more morphine. They switched to a different pain medication to give me, but I forget the name, something with P, but whichever. So they were giving me that for a while, and I was just progressing. My contractions got worse and more painful. Because my pain was getting really intolerable, I asked the nurse about an epidural. Now this had been on my birth plan. I was entirely for receiving, all the drugs. So I asked the nurse, and she'd explained to me before that if you get the epidural too early, it might not last. And I'm not quite sure how that works, because I always thought you could, continuously receive the medication through that like little hose that goes into your back. But anyway, she'd warned me about that. But I was like, you know what? I'm thinking I want that epidural now. And so she called it in, and at 1:45 midnight, the doctor was there and gave me the epidural. Shortly after that, and the epidural didn't hurt at all. I'd had epidurals before for a knee surgery and last summer when I was sick, when my lungs were filled with fluid. So I knew what I was getting into, and I wasn't worried about it at all. I don't find it bad whatsoever. So shortly after I got that epidural, I felt better immediately. And with the beforehand with the morphine, I had been shaking like crazy, like my teeth had been shattering, and actually the next day my mouth would hurt so bad because I'd been, like, my teeth had been shattering so bad, and that got less once I got the epidural. I felt immediately better. I do not regret getting the epidural whatsoever. So afterwards, I got checked by the nurse to see how I was progressing. And at this point, I was now 8 to 9 centimeters dilated and 100% effaced. So I had progressed. And this was at about midnight. Now at 1:37, I got checked again, and I was then at 10 centimeters. So I'd fully progressed, and the nurses essentially gave me the option: do you want to start pushing now, or do you want to wait until you feel the urge to push? I'm like, I'm feeling the urge to get this baby out of me. This whole laboring thing isn't that fun, so let's start pushing. We'd called my parents when I was 8 to 9 centimeters dilated. They'd arrived at the hospital. They had brought Tim some dinner because Tim and I both didn't have any dinner, so Tim had stepped out really quickly to get some dinner, and my mom had stayed with me when I was being checked. She now, actually at this point, when I was 10 centimeters, exactly, Tim actually just came back into the room. So my mom left the room. She went to wait outside with my dad in the hallway or in the family room, and Tim came back in. So I decided, you know what, at about 1:45, I'm gonna start pushing. It was 2 nurses in the room, and they kind of explained to me what I had to do, like how to focus my pushing, how to breathe, and they were fantastic. Actually, one of the nurses was really good. The other one was she got a bit scatterbrained. She always forgot to count for me, and I really like the counting because it gives you something to focus on. So whenever a contraction would start, the nurse would actually let me know, because at that point my epidural was working, so I didn't really feel it. So she would start counting to 10, and I had to push 3 times to 10. No, actually at this point twice. So I had to do it twice, and then after that I had a break between contractions. So we did that for a while, and then eventually I felt it, and I think the epidural stopped working. Something happened, but it was bad. Like, that was real pain. Like, they're not joking when they say childbirth is painful. So eventually the doctors came in, and this was when I was a little further along with the labor. Hold on. What are you doing? All right, so little one was done eating. So the doctors are now in the room, and because I guess I'm getting pretty close to pushing her out, so it still took a while. I was pushing for just about 2 hours, and at the end it was bad. I was loud. Apparently I switched to German, which is my mother tongue, so I was now yelling at people in German, not yelling at them, but I was expressing my discomfort loudly. And eventually at 3:37 my daughter was born, and it was like I felt myself tear. I ended up with 2nd-degree tears, which isn't the worst, but it certainly wasn't pleasant. But the second she was put on my belly, it disappeared. Like, nothing mattered anymore. She was amazing. She was beautiful. She had a lot of hair, and she was just like, she was alert. Like, she was looking at us. So Tim and I were just amazed. Now we're completely preoccupied with little one. At the time, then the nurse was then, oh, it's okay. It's okay. Oh, it's okay. The nurse was pressing on my stomach. I think that was to help my placenta being birthed. The doctor then told me, you need to now push out the placenta, and that was no big deal whatsoever for me. So I think he kind of pulled it out as well, and it was just one push and it was out. It was nothing. It was no big deal. And then after that, they started stitching me up, which actually took quite a while. And I'm not sure if it was before the stitching up or after, but at some point the resident actually had to go in and get some blood clots out, and now that was painful. So I had her on my belly, but I know I was like raising myself up in bed and like trying to get away from him because it was not fun. But he got the blood clots out, and then either before or after that I was being sewn up, and that took quite a while. Little one, we were doing skin on skin. They weren't doing any measurements yet. I had asked that, that got delayed. We did delayed cord clamping as well, and then Tim eventually cut the cord. So that's when my beautiful daughter was born. And it was painful. It was not something that I really want to repeat, but it was all worth it because she's beautiful and I would do it all over again for her. So that was our labor and delivery story. Say bye, Clara. Oh, no, bye. Say bye.